Nearly 3,000 student protesters have been arrested across the United States as universities and law enforcement continue to violently crack down on student protest in solidarity with Gaza and Palestinians, calling for universities to divest from companies with ties to the Israeli military and calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. And as this continues, more than 50 chapters of the American Association of University Professors have put out a statement condemning the violent arrest by police at college campuses. And joining us today is one of those professors, Annelise Orleck, professor of American history, women, gender, and sexuality studies, and the former chair of the Jewish Studies program at Dartmouth College. Dr. Orleck, welcome to Let's Just Talk.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Dr. Orleck, could you begin by describing what happened during the protest at Dartmouth when you, along with dozens of your colleagues and students, were also arrested, and what led up to the moment of the arrest? How did it unfold? Give some context to the viral footage that we've seen of you.
Okay. The president and provost of the college had announced that they wouldn't stand for an encampment of students in support of Gaza. And as you know, these encampments have sprung up on college campuses across the US and around the world. And so they had issued a series of do's and don'ts earlier in the day, including prohibition on setting up any kind of structure on campus, on the campus green, any kind of tent, and also speaking through amplification, all of the things one might do at a rally. So early, it started as a labor rally because the graduate students were on strike for a living wage and for support for childcare, healthcare, et cetera. And they spoke through amplification, nothing happened. But shortly after the end of that rally, the undergraduates set up 5 tents. So only 10 students were in the encampment, and as soon as that happened, we began to get word that the police were ready to come in. Now, all of us thought it was going to be just a small showing of the local police force, which has usually been what has happened when there were any kind of campus protests that administration worried about. Although, there's been nothing like what was about to happen in 55 years, not since 1969, have riot troops been called onto campus, but that's exactly what happened. So at about 8, you began to have this military invasion. We had of our quiet campus green. We had armored vehicles. We had police with long guns. We had police with riot gear. The helmets, the truncheons. They had some kind of gun hanging. I don't know if it was a tear gas or what it was, but it was very intimidating. Some people have said there were police dogs. I didn't see them, but there may have been. Anyway, once they showed up on campus, because it was so unusual on our quiet campus, it was surreal, frankly. They had body armor. They looked like they stepped out of, a Darth Vader scene in Star Wars or a video game. And so more and more students started coming out because they were disturbed by what they saw on the green. So the actual rally was relatively small. However, after the riot police showed up, hundreds of students were flooding onto the green, and they were chanting, "Why are you in riot gear? There's no riot here." And the police just stayed still. And then we suddenly saw campus safety and security ordered off the green. And after that is when the arrest started. So they would just swoop in all of a sudden, grab someone, often with excessive force, and zip tie them really tightly in very painful looking ways. And I would just step out and try to video this so that I could have documentation of their tactics, because I was worried about my students. And I was with a group of older women professors and community. Most of the women I was with were Jewish, and I was the youngest at 65. So we're a group of women 65 to 82, and stood between our students and the riot police, hoping that we would prevent any kind of violence. And it's still surreal, but I realized how naive we were. The police were clearly planning to be violent to people, and that's what happened to me. I had said to the police, "Leave them alone. They're students. They're not criminals." And at that point, after I took another video of an arrest, I was body slammed from behind by several men in armor, and lifted off the ground, landed at the feet of the protesters. A student journalist helped me up, and I was mad because they took my phone when they body slammed me, and I went over and demanded it back. That's the video that went viral, is me demanding my phone back. And at that point, they lifted me up, one on each side, slammed me to the ground, and then pressed me to the ground, dragged me on my face across the grass, held me down. One policeman kneeled on my back. I said, "Please stop, you're hurting me." no response. I said, I can't breathe, please stop. And they said, you can breathe, you're talking.
Wow.
So that's what happened. Then they had three guys holding me down. One guy zip tied me.
Mhm.
And yeah, the zip ties were so tight, I was crying. And I said, please loosen them. I have, you're giving me the compressed nerves and in this hand, and none of it mattered. None of it mattered.
First of all, I'm so sorry about that experience. And second, what a show of how they keep all of us safe.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Right. And I want to continue by talking about your motivation for joining these student-led protests. You began touching on it a bit. Could you elaborate on your motivation? You're saying that you are 65 to 82-year-old Jewish women who are coming out here and standing with the students, shielding them from police violence and repression. Could you speak to, or attempting to rather,
Yeah.
could you speak to what motivated y'all to come out that day?
Well, there were dozens of faculty out there, so we were among a sizable contingent of faculty who worried
Mhm.
that something might happen to the students,
Right.
and we wanted to protect them. And the students were careful. There were international students there early on. There were some students from mixed status families, mixed immigration status. So some of them were undocumented, and so the students were very careful. They said, "All of you need to leave before the police come in,
Mhm.
so that you'll be safe,
Right.
and no one will end up getting deported." So that was wise and caring, and I think gives
Mhm.
you a sense of the kind of protest movement this was. It was
Right.
very communal, it was very caring, and that's what the faculty were doing. We were out there. I would like to say it was, and this is the truth, 100% peaceful, no signs of any kind of anti-Semitism, because I
Mhm.
get asked that question every time. Uh,
Right.
it was a beautiful event. There were, as you were describing the encampments you've seen before we went on camera, I think it was like that. I think the irony of this brutal crackdown across the country and around the world in the name of fighting anti-Semitism is that
Mhm.
in these encampments, we see Jews and Muslims, and in the case of this one, Christians and Buddhists as well,
Mhm.
taking care of each other,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and sharing religious rituals and building community. It's exactly what we need for peace.
Mhm.
Have there been campuses where students acted out, or where maybe some disturbing things were said? I'm sure, as in every
Mhm.
movement, as in every community, I'm sure there were people who said things that might have made Jewish students and community members feel unsafe. But I didn't see any of that, and what I saw was really beautiful and communal and
Mhm.
oriented toward peace, building the world they wanted to live in.
Yeah. And so you started touching on it. Could we talk about your view of how the media has been representing this? Because largely, if you listen to uh, Congress speak these days, if you listen to the President of the United States, if you listen to self-proclaimed journalists, it would seem as though these are the most violent, repressive, anti-Semitic rallies and marches taking place across the country. Um, is this your experience of being out there, and how do you view the media's representation of these encampments and these movements?
I think it's been incredibly irresponsible. The kinds of things that have been said about these encampments are egregiously wrong. For example, Dana Bash on CNN saying they were like the Hitler youth groups in Germany in the
Mm,
1930s, calling them our governor before they sent in the riot troops to our campus. And at the same time, the University of New Hampshire said that these two rallies were wildly anti-Semitic, purely anti-Semitic. And then he also
mm,
said 100% anti-Semitic. I would just like to suggest, and I won't say with all due respect, because I have no respect for him right now after he sent in, these riot police to hurt me and other students and other colleagues at both campuses. I am shocked. And so I think that media have got to stop saying that.
mhm.
And I hope that they will. And that's one of the reasons I've been talking myself hoarse
Right.
over the last week, is to try to correct this irresponsible misrepresentation of the encampments and the protesters.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, and what I find interesting is right now we have Congress members who have historically been known as anti-Semites now purporting to speak for the entire Jewish community. Um, how do you react to that when you see that happening um, live on national television and nobody is calling it out?
Well, I was really proud of the K to 12 teachers, because I've been saying all along that this crackdown on campuses and this weaponization of anti-Semitism
Mhm.
by people, most of whom are not even Jewish and are known as anti-Semites, is part of the larger campaign that the right has been waging for decades now to take over education. And it's
Mhm.
totally tied to the book bans and the bans on teaching, African American history and LGBT studies and any kind of uh, material that in New
Mhm.
Hampshire is outlawed by something they called divisive concepts laws.
Mhm.
So you can't teach anything that is, divisive. And when they called the K-12 administrators into Congress, because now not only are they calling college presidents to
Mhm.
say that they're not protecting Jewish community members against anti-Semitism, but also K-12 administrators, they were fierce, right?
Mhm.
And they didn't take it. I think the colleges have run have been more scared of this. The irony is so profound because these are the people who have been supporting the January 6th assaulters on the Capitol, January 6th, 2021, and call them political prisoners and, and say that we're doing nothing wrong. There are photos of people in that riot where they stormed the Capitol on January 6th wearing shirts with the logo 6MWE, which stood for 6 million wasn't enough. I saw another picture of a man wearing a Camp Auschwitz shirt, which was mocking the most lethal of all the concentration camps, the death camps that the Nazis created. So you
Mhm.
have Holocaust deniers and Holocaust applauders, and the people who support them are saying now they're the ones defending us against anti-Semitism. And one thing that has been talked about but never quite absorbed is the really sizable representation of Jewish students in these encampments.
Mhm.
And they're there because their Jewish values have taught them to oppose genocide. And
Mhm.
so the irony is just too much. It's enraging.
Right. And I, I saw an interview where you were talking about not confounding, not grouping together anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Well, of course.
Could you touch on that idea?
There are always going to be some Jews who believe that if you are anti-Zionist, you are anti-Semitic. To me, they're not in any way the same thing because anti-Zionism, or even if you're not an anti-Zionist, even if you are just a critic of the state of Israel and its policies at this moment, um, and the Gaza war is horrific, and there's any number of reasons why people would be critical of this unrestrained slaughter.
Mhm.
That's not the same as saying I don't like Jews because they're Jews. I feel that there's something wrong with them, or all Jews are like this. That's just really, it's not the same. It is the criticism of a state, and everyone is entitled to criticize, actions that they feel are wrong. That doesn't make you an anti-Semite. And I think it's particularly interesting to me that I've gotten so much hate mail since this video went viral, and a good chunk of it, calls me an anti-Semite. Maybe it doesn't matter to them that I'm Jewish. I am quite sure that probably a lot of the people who send me these these hate emails are not Jewish, calling
Mhm.
me an anti-Semite. So it's kind of a new McCarthyism. As a historian, I really feel like that. We're starting, it's this, the joke is, are you now or have you ever been a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, right? Back in the 50s,
Mhm.
that question was asked about the Communist Party. Now,
Right.
those opposing the war in Gaza are being hounded and investigated and frankly assaulted and brutalized.
Right. And what I also find sort of dystopian is you have Palestinian students on these campuses who are paying tuition to these universities and colleges that are actively benefiting and profiting from the demise of their family members.
Yes.
And then they're being told, hey, you need to shut up and not talk about this
Yeah.
or else. And so the idea of safety as well is like whose safety also matters, like you're unleashing um militarized police forces on a certain portion of the Jewish community that disagrees with you and a certain portion of the student population that disagrees with you, while claiming that you're keeping campuses safe, right? And then when we also look at it in terms of whose safety matters, you have Hisham Awartini from Brown University, along with three of his friends, who were shot for simply being Palestinian and wearing a keffiyeh, and he is now paralyzed. And you have Wadia al-Faoumi, who a 6-year-old Palestinian boy was stabbed to death 26 times. And these stories are endless. You have other Arab Americans who have been killed for their views and their stance, right? And this is happening simultaneously as anti-Semitism is also on the rise. And it is time that we recognize that like these stories of hate, these are all interconnected, right? They're all related. As one rises, so does the other. And how do we bring people together to talk about it? It's not by having these divisive media rhetoric out there that are going off and trying to divide people. But I want to get your reaction to what I just said.
Well, I completely agree with you. And the shooting of the 3 Palestinian students in Burlington, Vermont, hit very close to home because it is very close to where we are. And I was really struck by the fact that this president, who claims to really be concerned with the safety of students on our campus, never addressed it. I mean, it's just up the road from us, and she never addressed it. There was no discussion with Palestinian and Arab American students on campus about whether they felt unsafe. There were no counseling resources offered, and I think you're absolutely right that the rise of anti-Semitism and the rise of Islamophobia have gone hand in hand in the last few years, and skyrocketed since the October 7th Hamas attacks in Israel, and I think a lot of it's been called a moral panic. I call it a hysteria that doesn't allow us to talk about the realities of the horror in Gaza, and the rising tensions on college campuses. I think one thing that is part of it that's only starting to get press was there's some reporting in The Guardian about how many far-right actors are, I don't mean screen actors, but how many far-right figures are involved in, for example, the attack on April 30th on the student encampment at UCLA. Turned out that a couple of the people involved were people who had been harassing K-12 districts in Southern California about what kinds of books they were letting their kids read, and had taken a very strong anti-gay, anti-trans stance. And so the far right is involved in this supposedly pro-Israel movement. Meanwhile, they're not getting called out, but these peaceful students are being called like the Hitler Youth, and it's very offensive. And I'm grateful to you for looking for the insight. I'm grateful to The Guardian has been really, really good in its coverage. We're beginning to get into some of the mainstream outlets. I think, for example, the New York Times is starting to be a little bit better in its coverage. And our example, the Dartmouth campus, was so completely peaceful, and we were cracked down on so violently, so quickly, that I'm hoping that the story of what happened to us will help maybe change the tone of the discussion just a little bit. I don't know, but that's my hope.
Right. And of course, we all hope for that. We're gonna switch a little bit to administrative response. There's this unique story out of UPenn where they try to invite the police onto their campus to arrest their peaceful student encampments, and the attorney general was like, like, this is America. People have freedom of speech, freedom of expression and association, and as long as they're peaceful, they're allowed to say how they feel, what they feel. And we're not going to be stupid like Colombia, right? We're not going to beat up 18, 17, 19-year-old American students. So there is that. What do you hope, or what do you need from university administrations in terms of their responses? How can they move on from here, right? And we can end on that note. And also, of course, acknowledging that this is all happening because there have been over 35,000 Palestinians killed, over 15,000 children now. And today's Mother's Day, over 12,000 women and mothers have also been killed in this process. So we need to acknowledge that and sit with the space.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point, and I want to sit with it for a moment, that my Senator Bernie Sanders, who's also a Jewish American, has talked about the ways in which these campus crackdowns and the condemnations of campus protesters in some of the ways we've talked about is very conveniently pushing some of the news from Gaza off the front pages, and out of out of TV coverage. And we can't lose sight of that, because that is what the students are protesting. That is what we're all decrying. And that's what Jewish Americans involved in these protests are saying, not in our name, not in our name. And so I think in terms of administrative response, the history department at Dartmouth had a teach-in the other night that I participated in which we looked at, the whole history of campus protest at Dartmouth, and how many presidents in the last 55 years, and as I said, it was 55 years ago that was the last time riot police were called onto our campus. How many other presidents have said, okay, let's do other things. We will talk to the students, right? We will hold days of reflection. We will, there was a group that occupied the president's office looking at budget priorities some years back. And the president said, all right, I can't work in my office. I'm dropping off some pizza for you and I'll work from home, right? So I think there are many ways to handle this, and the authoritarian way and the violence that is now being inflicted on our own students disturbs me so much. These are our children. We're willing to shoot and beat our children, and over their views, and that is only been made possible by what you opened with, which is the media misrepresentation and the politicians' misrepresentation of them. As you said, they're 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I was in that police van on May 1st, with shaking, crying 18-year-olds, who were being roughed up by these, massive body armored riot cops, who showed very little remorse. Is that education? It's not education. Is that protecting anybody's education? No, it's disrupting communities. It's shattering campus peace. And what I need them to do is stop doing it. And what the district attorney of Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, did in saying you can't bring in these police onto the, University of Pennsylvania campus was beautiful. It was honoring American law and our rights under the Constitution. I just filed a civil rights complaint against the state of New Hampshire for the violation of my rights. I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but I want them to know that I know what they did. And I want the administration to know that I know what they did. And I hope that the involvement of faculty and the brutalization of faculty, and there have been 50 faculty who have been brutalized and arrested as part of this nationwide campaign, lets people know that let me maybe stop, take a step back and look at what's really happening and protect your children. There's a lot of talk of Jewish students feeling unsafe around rhetoric in support of Palestinian rights and Palestinian freedom. Let me tell you, people are a lot more unsafe when they're facing, armed police who are throwing them to the ground and beating them. And not only do I feel less safe on this campus than I ever have in my 34 years here, but what about our Palestinian students? What about our Arab American students, right? They deserve to feel safe on campus too. And I can tell you they do not feel that way right now. So we have a lot of healing to do.
Dr. Orleck, thank you so much for joining me on Let's Just Talk, and we look forward to continuing these conversations with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Of course.